Coming soon to Blu-ray.
That's right, we're doing Mean Girls, and on its 20th anniversary no less. I'm going to out myself and say that prior to the recent watch-throughs for this film, I had only seen this movie once and I didn't like it all that much. It was my second least anticipated movie of this month, and I admittedly grumbled as I shoved the DVD into my PS5 to watch it. And the current me is so sad that I felt that way because this movie is brilliant and fantastic, and I am so happy that the series made me watch it again. Maybe it was the people I had watched it with, maybe I was far too young to truly appreciate what this film is, but 2024 me has officially joined the Mean Girls Appreciation Club, and I am here to stay. I may not be the most hardcore fan out there, but I understand the obsession with this movie. This movie is smart, it's funny, and it's real. It is absolutely one of those movies worthy of all the hype that consistently surrounds it, and I'm going to try to cover a lot about this film in this episode, but do know that there's absolutely no way that I'm going to be able to mention everything. So, without further ado, let's talk about the instant classic that not only got a sequel, but a Broadway adaptation, another movie based on said Broadway adaptation, and even its own widely celebrated unofficial holiday every October 3rd. Let's start with a recap of the film. It's Cady Heron's first time going to high school from homeschool, but not only is she transitioning to North Shore High School, she's moved from Africa to Illinois after her mom gets a fancy new job in the States. Though her first day is a struggle, she quickly becomes friends with the self-proclaimed greatest people she will ever meet, Janice and Damien, who teach her the ins and outs of who's who at her new school. After bumping into the plastics, the queen bee of the school, Regina George, and her two lackeys Gretchen and Karen, Cady agrees to help infiltrate and seek revenge against the school's most popular trio for slighting Janice in the past. Things naturally don't go as planned, with revenge attempts going awry and Cady inadvertently giving it her all to become one of the plastics herself, and she's forced to take a step back to remember her sense of self, what's actually important in her life, and try to reconcile all of the strained relationships with her newfound friends. In a nutshell, you're watching high school unfold, and Lindsay Lohan does a fantastic job of making you feel like you're right back in the thick of it. She manages to pull off the lost, not exactly sure where you fit in with everybody vibe at the beginning of the movie that I know we've all felt at some point in our life, but also nails this kind of organic desperation to keep fitting in with not only the plastics, but Janice and Damien as well. Though Janice and Damien's thread may not be as obvious as the plastics, I feel like it's just as important as the witchy trios, as Cady wouldn't have even gotten involved with the girls in the first place if it hadn't been for Janice and Damien. It was her desperation to make and keep her very first friends in this completely foreign place that made her agree to such a crazy plan to counter bullying with shit-talking the plastics, i.e., more passive bullying. Though you can tell she's not completely dead set on going through with it in the beginning, she still agrees so she has a place where she can belong, so to speak. I think one of the reasons Lindsay played the role of Cady so perfectly in the scenes with the plastics was that she actually did get very shy when she was with award-winning actress Rachel McAdams, who played Regina and starred in The Notebook, which released 2 months later. Rachel was a little bit older than her, and Lindsay considered her a really accomplished actress, which she is, but I think it's a little bit funny that she did get so shy and starstruck because you had other actors on set like Rajiv Surendra, who played mathlete Kevin G, that considered Lindsay the most famous actor involved in the film because of her popular previous films The Parent Trap and Freaky Friday. Lindsay had actually tried out for the role of Regina, but her shyness was ultimately what landed her the role as Cady. Not a bad loss in my opinion, landing the lead role. Both Mamma Mia star Amanda Seyfried and the Queen of Hallmark movies Lacey Chabert had both tried out for Regina's role as well, and though they didn't fit the bill, they still ended up as plastics Karen Smith and Gretchen Wieners respectively. It looks like there was just as much obsession surrounding Regina George in real life as there was in the movie itself. These 4 actresses were so well cast that I don't think I could see anybody else in their roles, at least in the original movie anyways. Lindsay was as genuinely relatable as you can get as Cady, Lacey absolutely nailed Gretchen's almost manic chattiness and need for constant approval, even though it was Amanda's first film, she did such a good job playing the fearless airhead, and Rachel absolutely embodied Regina as the popular bully that for some reason we're all obsessed with, even though we know she's not a good person. Of course, I cannot leave out Daniel Franzese as Damien or Lizzie Kaplan as Janice because they are just as frickin' amazing. As the 20th anniversary for this film rolls around, I think I've seen more Damien memes on Twitter and on t-shirts than I have the rest of the cast. He is the perfect drama queen and drops the best one-liners in this film, and apparently Daniel was given a lot more creative freedom with his character due to the low expectations of how this movie would do in theaters, more on that later, and you can tell he had the best time playing Damien, making his goofiness all the more authentic. Lizzie is also just the best give no dams angry artist as Janice, and I absolutely love how unashamedly she marches to the beat of her own drum. These two together make the best comedic duo, but do so without becoming comedic throwaways that periodically come in to inject a random moment of levity before disappearing when they fulfilled their purpose. Yes, they were there to make you laugh, but, as mentioned before, They're super critical to the inevitable downfall of the plastics hierarchy, and were some of the voices that attempted to steer Katie out of the plastics brainwashing, or at least call her out on her bullshit. All of these characters, the reigning plastics or the common student of North Shore High School, were so well written and portrayed that they really did feel like students you would bump shoulders with in your high school hallways. I don't think a single one of them suffered from being flat or two-dimensional, including the parents. You knew everything you needed to know about Regina's mom because Amy Poehler totally nailed that oblivious ex-pick-me-girl vibe in her few but memorable scenes. You could easily see that Katie got her shy and naive side from her dad, and her hardworking fierceness from her mom, because ABC sitcom actors Neil Flynn and Anna Gaster embodied the clueless father and take-charge mother figures without making those personality traits too overbearing, so that's all the characters were. Even Tim Meadows managed to steer his character Mr. Duvall clear of his strictly principal who exists only at school movie stereotype and humanized him to a normal guy pining after his crush. And of course, let us not forget Tina Fey either, because without her, Mean Girls would not exist today. At least as we presently know it. We all know that Tina was, and still is, heavily involved in the making of Mean Girls, but I think the second equally as important force in the creation of this film is heavily overlooked. This movie is actually an adaptation of a nonfiction book by Rosalind Wiseman with aspects of Tina Fey's own experiences to freshen up the source material. Rosalind decided to sell the rights to her book titles, and bear with me here, it's a long title, Queen Bees and Wannabes, Helping Your Daughter Survive Cliques, Gossip, Boyfriends, and Other Realities of Adolescence, for $400,000 to Paramount 2 years prior to the release of the film it's inspired, and has been livid ever since. Why? Well, she claims, and I quote, "I think it's fair for me to be able to get compensated in some way for the work that changed our culture." Sounds like someone's upset that she didn't ask for more, and I can't say that I blame her. I might be a little salty too if my book spurned such a popular franchise and I didn't negotiate terms as well as I should have. And I say franchise because Mean Girls has far surpassed being just a movie. I think at this point we have 4 main sequels or adaptations of the 2004 original. It got an ABC Family sequel in 2011 that I actually didn't realize existed until I started this project that went to DVD only a month later, which kinda says a lot about the film. You'd think that a sequel following such a huge hit would make more of a splash in the cinema scene, but nope. Straight to DVD with you. Considering it's basically the same movie without the involvement of Tina Fey, I'm not all that surprised. Though she did say that had she known her fellow Saturday Night Live cohort Tim Meadows would return, she would have been involved. I feel like we went through the same sequel debacle with our last movie, Major League 2, as it suffered heavily from that copy and paste syndrome and banking way too hard on its predecessor, but I haven't seen Mean Girls 2 just yet, so I'm not sure if it sucks as hardcore as our 1994 movie did. There was also a graphic novel written by Ariana Irwin and illustrated by Alda Cordona that was released back in 2020 that brings back the original cast in a new story of yet another North Shore High School transfer and a direct sequel to the movie. Though this was made with the assistance of a Paramount director to make sure the returning characters didn't fly too far off the mark in this novel, I think this one flew a little more under the radar as it wasn't given near as much advertisement or attention as the other 3. At least, I wasn't aware that this novel existed either. The next adaptation, and one that I was aware of, was the Broadway musical which got 804 shows before a certain pandemic closed it down. It had the same characters of the original, but they were tailored and updated to work as musical characters. The actors were basically told to use the original movie characters as a guideline or reference and were able to remake them a little more into what was needed for Broadway. It was also modernized a little bit to work with what's relevant today, like the inclusion of social media, which wasn't really a huge thing in 2004. This musical got a few Tony nominations, and as it would turn out, Tina Fey's husband, Jeff Richmond, was actually the musical composer. It did so well that this year we got the Mean Girls musical movie, an adaptation of an adaptation. This time, instead of that Broadway charm, we've switched to more of a pop vibe, with Tina Fey once again writing the screenplay and producing the film with her former SNL boss Lorne Michaels, and Jeff Richmond returning to write more original songs. We have a whole new cast, including The Office star Jenna Fisher as Katie's mom, Mad Men star John Hamm as Coach Carr, Cougar Town star Busy Phillips as Mrs. George, Broadway star Andrew Rice returning for the role of Katie, and so many, many more. Just like the original, this movie's gotten pretty good Rotten Tomato scores from both critics and audiences alike. Though the original still wins with a tomato meter fresh rating of 84%, an audience score of 66%, the new movie musical's 70% tomato meter and 62% audience score is still pretty fetch. See, Regina? Fetch did happen. Even with all the sequels and adaptations, I have almost no doubt that there will only be more to come. Tina Fey has said, quote, "They are my Marvel universe and I love them dearly," end quote. And just as I don't see any signs of the MCU slowing down, I don't see any for Mean Girls either. The way this franchise's popularity has only continued to spread is almost infectious. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen the Santa's Helper skit done for a high school or college club performance, or Mrs. George's tracksuit and pink-clad girls as plastics thrown together for Halloween costumes. Mean Girls is everywhere, including the celebrity sphere. Christmas icon Mariah Carey is apparently a die-hard fan of the movie, so much so that the opening quote to her single Obsessed is a Regina George quote, not to mention that she absolutely swept in Mean Girls trivia during a 2020 episode of Billboard's web series Quizzed that also just so happened to be hosted by Tina Fey. Taylor Swift bought a silver Lexus SC340 convertible when her career started to take off because that was the car that Regina George drove in the movie. Katy Perry also subtweeted her when she wrote, "Watch out for Regina George in sheep's clothing," which may or may not have also been Taylor responding to a Burn Book reference in her single, "Look What You Made Me Do." Ariana Grande's Thank You Next music video also pays homage to a number of super popular early 2000s movies and naturally starts off with a Mean Girls tribute. She even managed to get cameos from the original movie's actors Jonathan Bennett and Stephanie Drummond. The English band Wet Log won a Grammy for their single Chase Lounge. Their lyrics actually include the infamous cafeteria lines, "Is your muffin buttered? Would you like someone to butter your muffin?" Then of course there's Meryl Streep telling Vogue that the film is essentially a quote-unquote religious text in her home as she and her daughters watch it so often, and Jennifer Lawrence's People's Choice Awards acceptance speech in which she said she wished she was in Mean Girls so she could break up her trophy into pieces to share with her fans. I could keep going on and on and on, but I think you get the point. Tina Fey has thanked Basic Cable's repeated airings of her film leading up to the era of social media for keeping Mean Girls relevant numerous times, and I kind of agree with her. Because of these reruns, it stayed fresh on everyone's mind long enough for social media to take over and boost it to higher popularity with easily repostable GIFs and iconic memes. Even Daniel Franzese has gone on record to say, "We were the first memeable movie. As long as there's internet, Mean Girls is relevant." Though I mostly agree with this statement, I also have to disagree in a very nitpicky sort of manner because this movie will always be relevant regardless of the existence of social media. This movie is all about insecurities, bullying, and figuring out where we fit into the grand scheme of things. Everybody has gone through this phase, will go through this phase, or has yet to finish going through this phase of trying to figure themselves out in one way or another. It's the one common denominator that we will all experience in our own all-too-personal way, and Mean Girls manages to touch on it in a way where we can all relate to it in some form or fashion. Even though the movie primarily focuses on a group of high school girls, this movie isn't just about high school girls. It's about all of us. We may be the Katies, who get lost before we find our path. The Reginas, who feel our self-worth is measured by how supposedly superior we are to others. The Janices, who are angered because we were scorned for being ourselves before we can find our own peace. Or, realistically, the ones who are still figuring it out. Cliques, bullying, and insecurities have always been here, and they will unfortunately never go away. Mean Girls will always be relevant because, even as things like the technology and fashion in this film start to grow a little more outdated by the day, these topics that it covers in such a brilliant way will always keep it relevant. So yes, it absolutely holds up today, but there are also some important things that, as we've become more socially conscious, absolutely don't. It was quite jarring to hear a lot of these outright homophobic, stereotyped, and insensitive phrases thrown around that were used a lot and were considered okay in the early 2000s, but have rightfully been evicted from our daily usage since then and would probably have gotten this movie cancelled if it were released as is today. Again, we've gotten far more inclusive and aware since this movie released, but as someone who's seen this twice in her life, once back then and once within the last month, it did make me wince a few times and made me feel like it was definitely worth bringing up. This still has not stopped it from remaining a classic, however, and I think a lot of fans are willing to forgive this, as even though it is still highly relevant today, it is also very much a product of its time. It's still a part of the box office it crowd as evidenced by how well it and the majority of its sequels are doing, and is maintaining its astounding phenomenon status. Even with all the love this movie ended up receiving, there weren't a lot of high hopes for this film in the beginning, or even during the production. Apparently Paramount didn't care all that much about what was going on in the makings of this classic, and gave it an abysmal $17 million to work with. Rumor had it that it wouldn't even make it to theaters and go straight to DVD. I can't even imagine what the reaction was when it ended up raking in over $129 million worldwide. So how did it do domestically? With the aforementioned budget of $17 million, Mean Girls generated an overall domestic revenue of $86,058,055 at the box office. Though this was the highest grossing film released in April, it was in fact bullied out of first place in monthly earnings by Hellboy. Mean Girls generated $8,571,562 its first month in office, a mere fraction of Hellboy's $56,137,408. Given the fact that Mean Girls was released the very last day of April, $8 million is pretty decent for a single day when this film was anticipated to flop to begin with. It's also worth mentioning that the documentary Space Station 3D, narrated by Tom Cruise, was released in theaters this same month and could arguably hold the overall revenue win with its overall grossing of $93,383,953. However, since this 47-minute long IMAX special was originally released in April 19, 2002, and is technically classified as a documentary instead of a movie, I have ultimately given the win to Mean Girls with its original release date in 2004, the year we are currently covering. Like I said before, I know there are a ton of things I've left out about this film, as there's just so much to talk about, so please feel free to share your Mean Girls knowledge in the comments below. Tell us what you'd end up in the burn book for, or why you think Regina George did nothing wrong. Did I rob Space Station 3D of this month's win, or did the plastics win it fair and square? Let me know. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week in 2014.